Oh, cool. We have some validation that works and that's fine, but there is a little thing, a little problem. That is that we really start to have a lot of logic in here. We need to figure out how to move this logic and actually, first of all, we want to reuse this code and we don't want this to be a huge complex HTML file we cannot read when we come back to it later. So I'm going to grab some of the logic here and I'm going to move it inside our TS file instead. What I want to do is pretty much just make a new function called isInvalid, just a function that we can kind of call to actually figure out if the code is invalid or the control is invalid. Now to call this, we kind of need a control. And how would we do that? Well, let's first of all, we need to know the control's name, right? So control name, that could be like first name, that's a control, right? Or last name, that's a control. And we're going to pass that in as a string. So that's what we kind of need. Now with that string, I can go and I can actually figure out a specific control. And I'll just keep it around as a constant. It's not something that's going to change. And I'm going to put in the actual control here, and that's going to be equal. And how do we get a control? Well, we say this.customer group, right? That's where we have the controls, and then we can do just like we did in the HTML and say we want to get a specific control, and that control is going to be actually the control that we're getting with this specific control name. So now we have the control available. Now all we need to do is we need to return if the control is invalid, right? Like we had in the HTML, let me just show you. We're trying to do this now. We're going to ask if it's invalid or it's either this or this, right? So we're going to try and do that in the code now. So we're going to say that we want to return if the control is invalid or, and the control is either touched or dirty, right? Either touched or it's dirty, just like we did in the UI. Now notice it's just easier for us to start doing this inside the TypeScript code. This is something that belongs in here because it's kind of logic, right? Right now we're not using this invalid, so let's just go and actually create the isInvalid up here. And instead of using this huge bunch of code right now, we're just going to switch it with a simple line that says isInvalid, and in there we're going to add the first name, like this, first name. There we go. Now we just use the function, and we can now reuse that function down here in the if statement. Notice I just saved a lot of code by doing this, but is it still working? We have to figure that out. So there we go. It seems to be working. Everything is working. Jumping back and let's just have another look at the code right here. It's just moving the logic. Instead of trying to reuse it out here, we make a function inside the TypeScript that can just test if any control is invalid, and we can now reuse this. Next lesson, I'll try and show you how we can reuse it. See you next time. Have fun.